This lesson is on solving systems of inequalities. Let's review what are the four inequality symbols. This symbol right here is the less than sign. It almost looks like the symbol itself makes the letter L, less than. The symbol that goes the opposite direction is the greater than symbol. But if you put a line underneath either one of these, then you're saying less than or equal to. The greater than symbol with the line under it would then be greater than or equal to. To help you remember each one, besides the less than symbol making the L, hold your hands up in front of you and make L's with both your left and right hand. Now notice your right hand, that's not a true L, that's a backwards L. Now pinch your fingers together just slightly so that you can see the two symbols with your fingers, the less than symbol and the greater than symbol. Remember that the left hand is the less than symbol, left hand left, and you can see in your fingers the symbol that you just created with your left hand. In a little bit you're going to learn about shading. So not only can you use your fingers this way to help you remember the difference between less than and greater than, but I would like for you to raise your right hand higher than your left hand. This is going to help us later with our shading. So your greater than symbol is higher or above your left hand, the less than symbol. We'll get back to above and below in just a minute. When you start off graphing an inequality, it is just like graphing an equation. You will first want to make sure your inequality is in the y equals mx plus b format, the slope-intercept format. The only difference is you're going to have an inequality instead of an equal sign. So look at these problems here. Now in each one of my examples, to save us time, I did put all of them in slope-intercept form. So y being isolated, followed by the inequality, followed by the x term, and then followed that by the constant, or your b value. Keep in mind, if you ever have an inequality that is not in this format, you will need to rearrange it. The next thing you want to do is go ahead and graph it as if it was an equation instead of an inequality. So I'm going to start off to graph problem number 1. Just like when graphing an equation, I always begin with b. In this case, that's positive 3 on the first inequality. So I will plot that point on my y-axis. That is the y-intercept, just like an equation. Then I will use my slope to find another point on the line. This inequality has a negative slope, so I will count down, or fall, 4, and run to the right 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, and run right 3. Puts me right there. Then I will draw my line. Do use a ruler on these. They must be straight. So far, everything is exactly the same as graphing an equation. But now we have 2 more steps. After you've drawn your line, you need to ask yourself, should this line stay solid or should it be dashed? The way you can remember which is which is if the inequality has the line or with the line, it's a solid line. So with the line, solid line. So look at our inequality on the first inequality statement. It is a less than. There is no line underneath it. Therefore, this line needs to be dashed. Now, some people, when they're drawing their line, can dash it as they're drawing, or you can just simply take your eraser and every so spot, just make a little eraser so that it can be dashed. Now, I erased a little bit much. Let's see if I can still make it look like a dashed line for you. There, that's a little bit better. So that you can see it is not a solid line. The next thing you need to ask yourself is whether or not you're going to shade above or below the line. Now, we're actually not going to start our shading just yet, but instead of shading right away, I'm going to put a little guide arrows at each end of this line to let me know if I'm supposed to shade above or below the line. So I'm going to use just another color here or something. Let me see. And this is just going to be a little tiny arrow. This actually isn't part of the graph. It's just something I would do to help me see what I need to shade later on. So how do I know if I shade above or below the line? Remember when I told you to hold your hands up before? The direction of your inequality lets you know whether or not to shade above or below the line. Let's hold our hands up again. Remember, our greater than symbol is above our less than symbol when we hold our hands up. So look at the inequality statement. Which do we have, less than or greater than? This is the less than sign. Because the less than sign is below our greater than sign, that's where you're going to shade. So normally if we had an inequality and we just had one equation, we would shade below the line. You don't have to color the whole thing in. Usually everybody just scribbles. We're not going to do that just yet, so hold off. Sorry if you did that already. Instead, what I would like for you to do is on either end of the line, at the very end, draw a little teeny arrow pointing down. We're going to use this as reference later on. Little tiny arrow pointing down. So when we say below the line, sometimes that can be hard to see. It's a matter of perspective. So what we're saying is we go down from Y. If you look at your y-intercept, you can make yourself another little guide arrow pointing straight down, just letting you know that that's our shading eventually is going to be underneath this line right here. Okay, I'm going to leave everything as is, and we're going to take a look at the next equation. In the next equation, the y-intercept is -3. And the slope is 2/3. So I'm going to count up 2 and run right 3. So rise 2, run right 3. That puts me right. Oh, I forgot my eraser on, sorry. Puts me right there. Then I'm going to draw my line, just as I did before. So remember, after you draw your line, you ask yourself, is it dashed or solid? Well, look at your inequality. I see a line right there. See the line? Because there's a line, you keep your line solid. With a line, solid line. Alright, so we are not going to erase anything on that line. The next thing we need to look at is the direction of the inequality. Is it greater than or less than? Look at that inequality. It is greater than. It does not make a true L. And remember how we held our hands up? Your greater than symbol was above your less than symbol. So that means we're going to shade above this line. So once again, I'm just going to draw a little tiny arrow pointing up above this line. Again, it's a matter of perspective, so if you can't see which is which, go to your y-intercept. It should be pointing up. Now, I'm going to do those guide arrows in a different color because there's something I want you to see in a minute. So, I don't know if you can see that real well. And let me try a different pen. So, we're going to have lots of colors here in a second. Alright, so the actual area that you shade is going to be the quadrant of the intersection. Oh, here, back up and explain this again a little bit better. Notice that when you draw your two lines, you divide your coordinate plane into 4 sections. Now, there may not always be equal size sections. We'll just, for a second here, I'll call this section 1, section 2, section 3, section 4. When you're solving an inequality, only one of these 4 sections will be colored in. So that you know which section is going to be colored in, look at your guide arrows. Find guide arrows for one from each line that are pointing towards each other. For example, let's look at section 1. I see a purple guide arrow pointing one way, and the blue arrows, they're not pointing towards one another. So it's not section 1 that I need to shade. So what I was looking at was this guide arrow and these guide arrows. They are not pointing towards each other. So we wouldn't shade section 1. Look at section 2. In section 2, I have these guide arrows and these guide arrows. Notice they are pointing towards each other. So the guide arrows help me see, okay, this is the section that you would actually shade. So everything in the whole area is what gets shaded. And that actually is your answer. Your solution to a system of an inequality is any point that falls in that sector or on the solid line. So we notice our green line there. Any point, you just go ahead and put some points on here for you. If I put a point here, that's a solution. If I put it here, that's a solution. Solution, solution, solution. Or on this line right here is also a solution. Now it still needs to be below the red line, so there, that's a solution. Any of those points are considered solutions to the inequality. What are not solutions to this inequality is any point that falls in any of the other 3 sectors or any point that is on a dash line. Those are not solutions. On the Algebra ECA, you may be asked, or given the graph and the inequality, asked, is a certain point a solution to the inequality? For example, is the point -4, -2 a solution? Well, plot that point on your graph. -4, -2 is right here. So would that be a solution? Yes, because it's in the shaded sector. Alright, let's try graphing another system of an inequality. Alright, looking at problem number 2, let's graph the first inequality. We call it an inequality instead of an equation. So the y-intercept is -2, so I'll plot that point there. Using the slope of 1/3, I will rise 1 and run 3. Which way do we run? to the right. Always run right. Sorry. There we go. Once you graph your 2 points, then graph the line that connects them, keeping it as straight as you possibly can using a ruler. Extend it beyond the coordinate plane. The more room you give yourself beyond the coordinate plane, the more room you will have for drawing your guide arrows, and you won't be confused by the lines themselves. So you have your line drawn. Now you need to ask yourself, do I dash it or do I keep it solid? So look at the inequality. There is no line, so you have to dash it. So I'm going to get my eraser and just go down the line and erase a little bit along the line to make it a dashed line. After I ask solid or dash, then I need to know, is it above or below where I need to shade. Again, look at your inequality. Is that the less than sign or the greater than sign? Less than, so less than is below. If you forget which way, hold your hands up. So below. So I'm going to draw my little guide arrows pointing down. Now I'm going to graph the other equation. Again, I begin with B, so I plot my y-intercept at +3. I use my slope, which I see as a 2, but I'm going to make it into a fraction by writing a 1 underneath it. So that means I rise 2 and run 1. There it is. And then I'm going to draw my line using the ruler. Trying to keep it as straight as I possibly can. Extend it way past the coordinate plane. Once I've drawn my line, I ask myself again, dashed or solid? Take a look at that inequality, you tell me. Did you say dashed? Hopefully so. So that means we go back and erase little marks to make it look like a dashed line. On the ECA, you will actually have a button that once you select your line, that if you click the button, it will dash it for you. Now I need to know, should I shade above or below? Again, look at your inequality. That is the less than sign. So do you shade above or below with your less than? Hold your hands up if you don't remember. It's less than. So on that line there, again, for the point of reference, find your y-intercept and draw a little line pointing down. And then go to each end and point a little line down, little line down. Okay, so now looking at your guide arrows, let's look at our 4 sections. I'm going to go ahead and number them for you so that you know where I'm talking. So I'm going to call this section 1, section 2, this little tiny section in here, section 3, and here's section 4. Now let's examine each section. In section 1, I have this guide arrow here on this line and this guide arrow here on this line. Are they pointing towards one another? No. So you would not shade section 1. Look at section 2. On each end of the line of the 2 lines, this one's pointing down and this one's pointing down. So these 2 are definitely not pointing towards section 2 at all. So it's not section 2. Look at section 3. In section 3, the 2 ends there are here and here. We do have some special situations when you're graphing inequalities. Example 3 is one where we're going to have a special condition. So let's go ahead and graph these 2 inequalities. First of all, look at the x greater than 3. So I notice in this inequality I only have one variable. What did you do when you only had one variable with an equation? Remember, you asked yourself a question. What was that question? Why me? Is there a y here? No, no y. So if it's not a horizontal line, like when you would hold your hands out and say, why me? Then the only other option is it has to be a vertical line. So on your graph, on the x-axis, you have to find the positive 3. The graph of this line is then a vertical line at positive 3 on the x-axis because there is no y variable in the inequality. Alright, we have one line graphed. Now let's before we get finished with that, remember our other two questions that we have to ask ourselves. Is it dashed or solid? Is there a line? No, because only with a line is it a solid line. So we do have to make this a dashed line. So I'm going to go back and erase to make this a dashed line. And then the next question we ask us, is it above or below? So this is where we're going to get a little tricky. Look at the inequality. I see that it is the greater than symbol. So greater than, remember, greater than was above the less than sign when you held your hands up. So this meant above. Well, look at this line here. How can you say above the line when it's straight up and down? Well, we're going to add something else. Or to the right, going positive, of a vertical line. So this is one of those special circumstances. If you have a vertical line, you can't go up, but you can go to the right. Alright. Now the other equation or inequality shouldn't be as bad because we have both the x and the y variable in this inequality. I begin with b, so at -2 on my y-axis. And then use the slope of 1/3, so I rise 1 and run 3. Plot the next point on the line, draw my line, what do I do next? Asked, is it dashed or solid? Look at the inequality. Is there a line? Oops. Is there a line? Yes. With a line is a solid line, so actually we don't do any erasing with this one. Next we look at our direction. Is this a greater than or less than symbol that you see here? Less than would look like a squished L. That's not a true L, that's backwards, so that's the greater than sign. Does greater than mean above or does it mean below? It means above. So on either end of our line we just drew, I'm going to draw a little guide arrow pointing up. Now I need to know which section do I shade, section 1, section 2, section 3, or section 4. Look at your guide arrows. In section 1, I see this guide arrow and this guide arrow. See how they're pointing towards one another? So this is the section that gets shaded. And that's your answer. I have one final example to show you in a special condition. In this condition here, we do have parallel lines. How do I know that they're parallel without even starting to graph? Take a look at their slopes. See how they're exactly the same? But their y-intercepts are not the same. So remember, when your slopes are the same but the y-intercepts are not the same, you will have parallel lines. Unlike when you're solving equations, though, system of equations, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's no solution. It's just going to look a little different. I'm going to go ahead and graph these lines. So here I have the both lines graphed. They're both dashed because there's no line under either one of those inequalities. But they're also both less than. So when you have both of these statements, what you're trying to say is whatever section you're shading. Now notice, because they're not intersecting, we don't have 4 sections. We actually have 3. Do you see them? There's section 1, section 2, and section 3. Remember, you only ever shade one section. So let's take a look at this. What would make both of these statements true? They both say less than. The shaded section is both less than both of these lines. So it definitely wouldn't be section 1. Section 1 is greater than both of these lines. Section 2 is less than line A, but greater than line B. Section 3 is both less than line A and less than line B. So the section that you would shade would be section 3, and so this is what your graph would look like. It would have the 2 blue lines in the yellow shaded section if you had different colors. Now, unfortunately, on the ECA, I believe everything's the same color. The shaded section might be a little bit lighter in color. So that's the only other type of example I'm going to show you. You're going to have a whole sheet of guided practice. Good luck on these, and ask for more assistance if you need more help on graphing inequalities.